name's Whitney Tackett, and I am doing this presentation for my final master's class. What I have done is, since I'm not currently teaching anywhere, I worked with Miss Davis, who's running the computer for me today since the smart board's not cooperating, technology issues. I worked with Miss Davis's kindergarten class, and we worked on implementing writing strategies in her classroom. So this is just an overview of the action research that I performed with Miss Davis throughout the course. Okay, the topic that we decided to work on was writing strategies that promote the scores of writing portfolios at the kindergarten level. When I talked to Miss Davis, she said that Dorton Elementary's goal was to improve program review scores. I've got right here, the school actually scored proficient, which is great, but we always want to aim for a school of distinction. So the goal of implementing writing portfolios at the kindergarten grade level is to help to increase the school's overall program review scores in writing. And like I said, the reason we decided to work on the portfolios was to get those program review scores to be distinguished. My research questions that I chose in order to do this project were: what writing strategies can be utilized in the classroom in order to promote stronger writing pieces at the kindergarten and first grade levels? I talked with Miss Davis, and after doing the project, we thought that the writing strategies we used could be shared with first grade and maybe even upper primary too. The second research question is: what modifications can be made in order to ensure the success of all students in creating pieces for writing portfolios? Okay, this is the purpose of the study, which I've talked to you about a little bit already. But at a PLC meeting near the beginning of your school year, the primary teachers decided that there needed to be an emphasis on the writing portion of the program review. And the reason I was interested in observing Miss Davis is I formally taught kindergarten for 3 years at Jenkins Independent. So I was always interested in trying to find new ways to implement writing strategies. Because at the kindergarten level, not all of them come to us writing, especially at the beginning of the year. So as emergent writers, what strategies can we use in order to make those writing pieces even stronger? So I observed Miss Davis in order to study the different writing strategies, and many students, like I said, came in as emergent writers. So we've got to figure out how to improve writing skills at such an early age. At the end of this study, my goal was to have each student either drawing, dictating, or writing sentences in response to opinion, informational, and narrative writing pieces, since that's in the standards. While doing my action research, I found two pieces of literature to help me conduct my research. The first one was Evidence-Based Practices for Teaching Writing, and the article, they actually did research on the best writing strategies for grades 4 through 12. However, whenever I read through the article, I thought we could definitely modify these strategies for the kindergarten and early primary levels. The authors recommended explicitly teaching students the steps of the writing process, the brainstorming, revising, editing, and publishing. And they also recommended summarizing text, which is connected to the Common Core standards, and to write collaboratively, to write all together, to share ideas and to allow students to revise each other's pieces and to edit. This helped to, in this article, enhance vocabulary, and it helps students to learn how to give that constructive feedback to one another. It's always important to set goals for students as you assign the writing prompts. So they need to know what you expect them to do at the main beginning before they even start writing. Go ahead, Ms. Davis, to the next slide. Okay, this is still from the same article. They also suggested strategies such as word processing. Let them get on and practice typing on the keyboards whenever they're writing pieces. Sentence combining, process writing, inquiry-based writings, pre-writings, and models. The strategies from the article that have been used for this study with Ms. Davis, we use modeling because at kindergarten and first grade levels, we have to do excessive modeling in order to get them to understand what they're supposed to do. We use pre-writing, story summarization, and the collaborative writing groups. Go ahead. The second piece of literature I found is actually, it dates back to 1997, so it's an old, it's actually an old research project I stumbled across whenever looking for kindergarten writing strategies. And the people that did this research went into a veteran kindergarten teacher's classroom, and they conducted several procedures, and it was based around writer's workshop. And whenever I was reading through the article, it really surprised me at how much those procedures were similar to what we try to do in our classrooms today. So even though education is changing, we can still use the same strategies, just up them up a little bit. In the writer's workshop, they implemented it 45 minutes a day. Students learned a new skill in 15 minutes. That's where the teacher had a whole group, and she or he taught the new skill. They were given writing time, and then they were allowed to collaborate with peers in order to obtain ideas on how to strengthen their writing pieces, which was mentioned earlier. The study proved that kindergarten students were not too young to be taught the writing process, and even learned how to talk with peers and give constructive feedback at the age of 5. So after reading this, I definitely wanted to try this with Ms. Davis's students. Okay, this is where it's the data sources and collection. What did I do, and what did Ms. Davis do to help me do this action research? We conducted the study over 2 weeks, and Ms. Davis has 18 kindergarten students, and they're all at the age of 5. The results of this study were keeping confidential except for Ms. Davis and the people in this room who work with those students on a day-to-day basis. And the data has also been analyzed in small PLC groups. The process started with the benchmark writing assessment. Ms. Davis gave them a simple open response that they had to create, or they had to compose independently. And that was at the beginning of the study. And then throughout the study, she taught the strategies researched, which were the writing workshop and the modeling. The third thing we did, writing assessments were continued to be given over the course of 10 days after research strategies were taught. Students were given open responses based upon their personal opinions, like their favorite color, their favorite animal, and they were graded using the Dorton's kindergarten writing rubric. And Ms. Davis shared that with me as well. The students' progress was monitored through the use of observation and checklist. And I took that data and I analyzed it, and you'll see the results of that later on. And we used modifications throughout the study with students who weren't able to write independently, and that's completely normal at this stage of the kindergarten school year. It's just October, so a lot of them, whenever we did this study, they couldn't write sentences, or they couldn't write their name even. So it was a good way to see them grow throughout the study, and you'll see those results later. The students that were not able to write, they were allowed to draw and answer the question, or to dictate the answer to either Ms. Davis or her aide, or me on the days that I was here. And students were taught during writer's workshop how to add detail to drawings and dictate and complete sentences. Okay, the data was collected and was analyzed. Whenever I was creating the PowerPoint, we were still waiting on the data to be collected. So now that it is, I analyzed it at the end of the study. We examined from the benchmark assessment to the final assessment, and we used those formative assessments given throughout the study. I took the average of benchmark assessments and compared them to the final assessments. I've got a chart for you to look at on that later on as well. And those open responses were given every day throughout the study. I think Ms. Davis normally gives them on Fridays, but for this purpose, we did a small one every day. And they recorded their responses in their writing journals. The open response assessments will be compared to other writing assessments given throughout the writer's workshop. And this will show if the strategies taught at the beginning actually benefited those scores of the open responses. Okay. The table on the following slide shows the progress of each student in the classroom over the series of 11 open responses. This was the rubric Ms. Davis gave to me. She said she scored 0 through 4, and I interpreted 0 to be blank, 1 to be like a novice, 2 to be apprentice, 3 proficient, and 4 is distinguished. All right, right here I've got the students numbered 1 through 18. The first column here is the benchmark, and we see a lot of 2s, a few 3s, and actually quite a bit of 1s, because on the benchmark they had to complete this independently with no help or we didn't use any writing strategies at the beginning. And then I've recorded the scores throughout 9 open responses, and you can look on the top on student 1. We went from 2 to a 2+, and then at the end the student made a 3. Going on down here, I'm not going to point out all of them, but let's look at one that had a novice at the beginning, a 1. You can see how they slowly progressed throughout the weeks on their open responses. And they ended up with the proficient at the end. And we even ended up with, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 4s, and a bunch of 3s. The majority was 3, so that was great. Go ahead, Ms. Davis, we'll go to the next one. So at the benchmark, the open response class average was a 2, which was apprentice. And we know that all schools' goal is to be proficient or higher. So we wanted to implement these strategies to make the class be at least proficient. The benchmark, like I said, was given without teaching writing strategies throughout the writer's workshop and the modeling. So we hadn't done any of that with the kids yet. And then whenever I was using the data to see if we had any improvements, the scores weren't consistent until toward the end of the study. Sometimes students would go from proficient to apprentice or distinguished to proficient, which is normal. You know, they're still learning how to apply those strategies to their writing. But during the final week, scores were more consistent. And I'm happy to tell you that the final class average was 3. They were proficient, and a lot of those were high 3s. So, next slide, Ms. Davis. Okay, so before I go over the results and findings, the way that we implemented Writer's Workshop, Ms. Davis had 18 kids. She has herself, her teacher's aide, and the days that I was here to observe, we broke the groups up, so there were 6 kids in each group. We would teach a skill, and then if it was, modeling, we would do a shared writing piece with them to show them, this is how we expect you to answer this open response. And then they had a few minutes to work independently, and they worked together within their group to help strengthen each other's writings. So it ended up being very successful. And it was a lot of time. It was 45 minutes, and I, as being a former teacher, I know you can't take 45 minutes out of every day, a normal day to do, writer's workshop. There's all kinds of other standards to cover. But what I also found was doing this writer's workshop, we covered all kinds of other standards from reading and science, even when we did those informative pieces. So we were actually able to hit many standards and not just the writing standards. And answering my research questions from earlier, what writing strategies can be utilized in the classroom in order to promote stronger writing pieces at the kindergarten